Hello everybody, John here. It's my pleasure to finally present to you the review of the XK8's brake upgrade. We need to start this video by winding back time over 6 months and remind ourselves of where this whole brake saga started, with testing the XK8 repeatedly until the brakes started to overheat and checking where we stopped. Our baseline is 21 metres braking from 50 miles an hour on a dry road. We'll be using exactly the same road conditions and road before and after. And normally the issue with those sorts of comparisons on a video like this would be, yeah, but John, you're changing old standard to new upgraded, and maybe just new standard would have been good. I've taken a bizarre move. Everything on my car were new. The car's only done about maybe 1,000 miles since they were replaced. So I'm doing the upgrade, old style, but excellent condition, to new or upgraded, and obviously in excellent condition. So hopefully you're going to come along on a journey with us throughout the entire brake saga. Everything we're doing obviously is on the XK8 behind me, Purdy, but will equally apply almost identically to any of the Jaguars of the same era, so the S-Type and the 308. But if you're dealing with your brakes and you're uncertain what you're doing, please, please, please get somebody who knows what they're doing to help you out, because it isn't something to mess around with. Fundamentally it's simple, but you're all proceeding at your own risk. See you later. So that's where it all began. First thing I'd like to do is just dispel any rumours that I'm saying that the XK8 standard brakes are bad. They're not. I've always said they're adequate and slightly uninspiring. For example, this is a chart extracted from the Highway Code, the UK's Guide to Good Driving, and you'll see that 50 miles per hour, the expected braking distance for a car is 38 metres. And that's obviously allowing for a little bit of bad weather, rough surfaces and all the rest of it. There's a 15-metre addition for thinking time. That doesn't come into it when we're doing brake tests. So in actual fact, we're already stopping in 2/3 of that distance. The car's excellent anti-dive geometry and refinement helps to hide the retardation it's capable of. However, those brake tests did confirm for me my own feelings that on the edge, on the limit, the car does start to boil its fluid, and it doesn't inspire confidence when really, really pushing on. So, what did we do to upgrade the brakes? Well, it all started with taking a look at the most fundamental of items in any car's braking system, the brake fluid. We bought ourselves a cheap tester and were able to establish that the fluid contained water, and by draining that out of an extraction system we were able to get rid of most of it before we pushed it out and bled it later. Then we started the process of disassembling the XK8's braking system. My car has 308mm discs and ATA single-sided calipers. First thing to come off was the flexi hoses, followed by stripping off the calipers themselves, the back plates, the carriers, and giving everything a really good clean down so we knew what we were starting with in terms of the basic raw materials. The hoses were probably original equipment. As you can tell, they look like they've corroded for some years, and although good quality, they are rubber, and you will definitely be losing some of the braking effort in expanding those tubes. The pads, almost brand new, but solid and unsplit. They have rubber backing plates on both of the brake pad back plates, which takes away some of your feel, and also they contain a lot of metals to reduce squeal. The carriers, there's not a lot to go wrong on these. They're big castings, but they're corroded on the guideways, and all of the rubber elements on the caliper were either perished or at least past their best. Piston seals, as you can see, not even fitted properly, and all of these things start to contribute towards minor amounts of drag where the pad is constantly making contact with the disc and constantly either warming up fluid or, as has definitely happened on my car over time, glazing the pads, glazing the discs. Having established there's nothing wrong with the castings, everything big and heavy was grip blasted in my little garage setup of a Clark grip blaster attached to a big old compressor, and taken back to bare metal, and then using my home rigged powder coating arrangements, I powder coated the big caliper and carrier elements in a really hard wearing gloss red coat that will prevent any further corrosion and will actually cure in the heat rather than worrying about caliper paints that don't always survive well in the heat that calipers see. The first purchased and upgraded parts bought were a caliper rebuild kit, and I removed all of the rubber elements and replaced those. The two bungs I've just pulled out are the guide pillars, important that they slide well on the slider pillars. We replaced the seals and the pistons themselves, the originals being chrome plated and were flaking. These are solid stainless. The hoses were replaced with EBC stainless steel braided hoses, and the idea of these is they won't expand, and therefore all of the pressure is going into pushing the hydraulics down to the caliper, not expanding the rubber and losing you brake feel and brake pressure. Using the old pads as guides, we identified the contact points with the caliper and dressed them to remove any excess powder coat and any rough surfaces so that we get a really perfect action on the pads as the pistons move them, allowing them to retract naturally when the pedal is released and not constantly rub, heating up the fluid and glazing the brakes over time. The next big purchase was EBC's grooved and vented thermic coated discs and Redstuff pads, which were purchased for both axles, and if you want the details of these I'll leave them in the description below. But quite a lot of time was expended working out which of the pads to go for, and I'll let myself remind you of some of that conversation. And on the back here there's all the info about the various pads that they do. They colour code them to give you an indication of what they're best for. I had a right argument with myself about which one to go for. Green Stuff is the first one in the ranking, if you like, the lowest one, but actually gives really good upgrade in braking performance. But it achieves that by generating quite a lot of dust. So a soft, high friction aramid formulation for high initial brake effect and fade resistance on sport compacts and hot hatches in street use. You know, that would have done me, to be fair, except I can't cope with the idea of all the brake dust. My car goes on track once in a blue moon, so would have been fine. Instead, I've gone for the Redstuff, the ceramic series, a ceramic particle enhanced lower dust aramid formulation for fast street use on premium import and domestic passenger cars. And the premium actually just means heavy, if we're honest, so pretty much made for something like a Jaguar. So Redstuff it was, and the first change is that the back of one of the pads has no rubber mounting, so it's again more precise. Both of them have a running in compound on the front to bed in with the discs really quickly, and they also have a venting groove. You can see the rubber pad on the back of the other one there. The discs, I think they're called UBC, again I'll put the link in below, have these grooves rather than any holes, and it's a rounded groove with an end, and the idea of that was to reduce whooshing and squealing noises you get with some of the high performance discs. Rebuilding the whole system was done carefully and enjoyed. It looks great, and it's great to be using brand new and clean parts. So carriers got remounted, discs tried in them, make sure there's no fouling points. Our beautiful restored caliper with fully lubed up slider pins using red lithium grease that's intended for the job. Pads fitted correctly to the calipers and installed, again taking care not to leave any wear points on the calipers where they might cause the pads to bind and not retract easily and fully. Whole thing reinstalled onto the hub and done up with the correct torques, and we could then fit our new upgraded hoses into the original positions, ready for the fluids to be included. The clips which stop the calipers from chattering and shaking and keep them from again rubbing on the discs were replaced with brand new stainless steel items, and this whole process was in principle repeated on the rears. The difference being that on the rears the calipers didn't end up getting powder coated because I didn't use a rebuild kit on them. I knew I was going to do that later, and to powder coat you need heat and the rubber would have been damaged. So that was a mistake and an oversight that I made. I also did have a brand new set of brake pads for the handbrake that fits inside the drum, but didn't change them just because they literally had not been used, and that really was pointless as we wouldn't be using them to improve our brake feel at all. We looked into pressure bleeding the brake system rather than pumping it with the pedal to ensure a thorough flush, pushing out all of the old fluid and making sure there's absolutely no chance of airlocks, taking close attention to the sequence in which the calipers have to be bled in order for it to fully bleed out and not leave any air in your ABS system. And then when the whole thing was finished, we took the car out on several very gentle runs and did a proper running in sequence on the brakes to bed them and make sure that the pads and discs got a really good intimate contact. The combination of the black thermic coating that the discs have when you first fit it and the abrasive running in compound that's on the Redstuff pads means it was really easy to see when the discs had fully cleaned up and the bedding in had been completed. All of which brings me and my dad and a couple of cameras and a tape measure back to the same bit of road 6 months later. COVID got in the way and made this rather a long process than anticipated, to do some more brake testing and give our impressions of how this whole experience has changed the Jag. And I'm very pleased to say the answer is dramatically.
Exactly the same. Exactly. exactly the same. Exactly.
That is great.
Thing off.
Right, so let me...
We'll lift this up.
Yeah. Smell the brakes.
You want the front or the back marker?
Where the wheel is. Front wheel.
Okay.
Right.
This is fixed off again, so
Okay.
I'll get you coming back in. It won't go on.
The big test, the acid test of any brake upgrade is how quickly do you stop? And there's going to be all sorts of caveats and why didn't use and all the rest of it. So I can only share my experiment with you. So in both cases, before and after, we used the same piece of road on a dry and warm day. In both cases, we hammered the car's brakes for about 10 cycles of repeated heavy braking until things were fully at temperature. The difference that made was that on the old brakes it added about a metre, and on the new brakes it reduced by about a metre. On the new brakes, it was the very first run that was 1 metre longer. All the other runs were exactly the same. On the old brakes, you could see it starting to creep. And I think if we'd have just carried on, eventually the brakes would have fully boiled and failed, but it was extending. But that's what really happened. So, how did they fare? First thing to note is the camera is currently positioned, look down the driveway, 5 metres closer to my car than the recommended braking distances in the highway code. That's the UK's guide to good driving, basically. It doesn't include thinking distance, because for these brake tests, obviously thinking distance didn't come into it. I was braking at a known point. So where you're sat as a viewer is closer to the car than the recommended braking distances. I want to emphasize that because I do not want people saying that John says the original brakes on the Jaguar are really bad. They're not. They're great. I've always said that they are adequate. They are underwhelming because the car is so capable, and they are more than capable of pulling you up really quickly. Also, the Jaguar XK8 has absolutely fantastic anti-dive geometry, which means when you hit the brakes hard, you don't get that throw you forward, nose down, tail in the air effect that you get on a lot of cheaper cars. That gives the impression of a lot of effort and strenuous braking. This lowers slightly at the front, then the whole car comes down to give maximum downforce onto the brakes. It's fantastic, but it does hide the braking effect significantly. So what I see as adequate is absolutely awesome. So with all that out of the way, what really happened? It was difficult to show in a graphical way on the public highway, so this is the technique we're going to use. These wheels are lined up with the front wheel of the XK8. This wheel represents the old brakes, and the car is now doing 60 miles an hour. I've just crossed a point on the road that is marked out, and I've hit the brakes as hard as I can. The ABS is stopping them from locking. Where did we stop? Stopped there. We did some more tests at 50 miles an hour. .50 miles an hour, old brakes. So both are significantly less than the recommended braking distances in the highway code. What I'm going to do now is representing on the left hand side of your screen a little more is the new brakes. So we're talking upgraded everything. And again, we're using a hot brake test. So on this side of the drive, we're going to start with the 60 mile an hour test. Shocked me too. Let's do 50 miles an hour. Amazing. I've also got to point out that doing the 60 mile an hour brake checks, which were repeatable, very, very repeatable, it started to hurt my neck. So that is some serious retardation. So we've got a position here, 50 miles an hour, we are stopping in 21 meters. .60 miles an hour, we are stopping in 24.5 meters. .60 miles an hour, this is 14 meters. 14. Absolutely incredible. And just back here, 11.5 meters. So there are our options for where we're going to stop. So what do these brakes really like? I'll give you the executive summary, and that is I'm incredibly happy with the results. They are now what I would call confidence inspiring. And I've still got that great thing at the moment that I'm very used to the car, but I'm still forgetting where I've upgraded the brakes. So I'm able to recognize the difference with the retardation and how it works and how it feels still. I'm sure that will become normal very quickly. So let's start with the negatives. This has not been a cheap exercise. As it turned out, it wasn't even a quick exercise, but that's more to do with the way I was working than anything else. Filming things makes things take an awful lot longer. The next one is, I haven't ended up with a hard brake pedal, which again, as somebody who's come from one-off specials, kit cars, etc., I've had a lot of reasonable performance machines, a lot of them without power assistance. and I still associate a really hard pedal, not as in hard to move, as in touches the brakes and doesn't move. I still associate that with good brakes, and I have not ended up with that. So if that's what you're after, then these mods are not going to give you that. It is slightly harder, let's call it, but I thought that the combination of new fluid, properly pressure bled, plus the braided hoses would give me something that I was more used to. It's better, but it's not giving me that. And I think a lot of that is the nature of the system. There's a reasonably long travel before you get any pedal action at all, and that's because we've got a large master cylinder that has a reasonable capacity, and therefore it has to shut off the valve into the reservoir before it can do anything, and it's a reasonably big port. So you're going to have that travel before anything happens. And then the nature of the servo assistance on this car is obviously going to be connected to luxury and refinement, and it does give you that effortless feel, which is accompanied by a big difference in where the pedal stops with no engine, unassisted, and where the pedal stops with assistance. And you've still got that slightly springy feel between I'm braking and full-on brakes. That's something I've just got to come to terms with. It's the nature of the car. But a few people asking questions where they're worried about their pedal because it goes to the floor before anything happens. That's really subjective. The pedal doesn't go to the floor before anything happens, but it does move a fair amount. So I'll put this little clip in now that shows on the fully modded car where that pedal moves, so you can compare. To look at pedal travel, I've got this caliper, which I'm going to use the wrong way, back to front, and compress it using the brake pedal. Okay, so I've put the caliper between the top left-hand corner of the brake pedal, and it's sitting on top of the flange on the dead pedal. You can see that better if I move it. There you go. The only reason I stick it there, it's a datum, and I can hold it whilst I work the pedal. And if I compress it, right. So that's our engine off. How far away from the floor does it get? So put this in, and we'll call that 13 centimeters. Just for the science of it, in case anybody's worried about different models and years and my car being broke or something. Let's give you the resting position. That, and we're going to call that 17 centimeters. So with the engine off, we've got 4 centimeters of dead travel before we get to the solid point. Yeah, I'm sure I could squeeze it more, but not without a lot of effort. Now I'm going to put the engine on. Put our caliper back in. I get exactly the same spot. Considerably further, I'll tell you that. And we've got 9.5. So 9.5 with the engine on, 13 with the engine off, and it started at 17. So the engine being on makes 3.5 centimeters difference to the pedal's stop position. So yes, you're never going to get a razor sharp feel with these, because the level of travel that you're expecting is probably to do with comfort and being able to regulate and modulate the pedal. But in terms of stopping power, I have now literally got nothing to complain about. The other negative, slightly disappointed in the EBC brake lines, the braided hoses, and I'm being picky, very picky, because I didn't feel that the banjo joints were perfectly aligned on the rears to give a kink-free path to the brakes. It may be the particular example that I've got. It may be that these brake lines, are generic for a range of cars, and that's kind of the average position it works out. Maybe I've just got a brake line, bad one, and maybe I'm super picky. But that's as much as I can fault. In every other regard, I'm very happy. Let's talk about fade. On the road, I have been unable to generate any fade whatsoever. I don't drive like a saint, and you know, I've got some really nice empty lanes around by me where I can go play and experiment. And as I said during the brake tests, full-on braking from 60 repeatedly was starting to hurt my neck, and I was still not generating any fade. I wasn't getting to the point where the brakes were warm enough that the braking effect was going off, and certainly nowhere near boiling fluid and getting the pedal to push back towards me. So keeping cool, absolutely fantastic. Also very happy to report there are no squeaks or squeals. I consciously did not use any copper slip, which is a copper-based grease, for those of you who don't know, which is kind of the mechanic's go-to cheat, you might say correct way of doing things, to stop brakes from squealing. You put it on the back of the pad, on the metal plate between the metal and the piston, and it basically insulates the two and stops them from being able to chatter. Brake manufacturers try and avoid this with shims and rubber plates and all sorts of things. The EBC brakes have one piece of rubber on the back of one of the pads, and it's very, very hard. And the combination of that, brand new clips, and the fact that I rebuilt the castings and cleaned off all of the slideways, so nothing drags, nothing stops the pistons from pulling away and taking the brake pad with them, means I'm not getting any rubbing. So there is no rolling brake sounds, so you don't get any little rubbing noises. And yeah, despite really hammering these brakes, I've never yet made them make any squealing sounds. The thermic coating, which is a posh name for decent paint, which completely covered the discs when new, has now polished off at all contact points with the pads. So the discs look very pretty in that all of the grooves are jet black. Everything that doesn't touch the pad is jet black, and the swept surface is nice and bright. And the actual reason for doing that, rather than just it looking pretty, is everywhere that is not swept by the pad is protected from rusting. On a normal disc, rust creeps in at the edges when you're not using the car for a little while. Next time you apply the brakes, the rust is quite spiky, and it takes a little bit of pad away, and that's where you get this creeping rusty ring that creates a ridge around the ends of your discs, because the pad doesn't keep biting in the same places. It's biting in a narrower and narrower section. The painted coating prevents that. That's working well. I like it. I would definitely use discs that have that in future. Next thing is the sounds. A lot of people with discs which are drilled and grooved say that they get a lot of whooshing noises as you apply the brakes. Absolutely nothing on these grooved discs, absolutely nothing, and is one of the reasons that they are promoted as a really great disc. These grooved effects create far less wind noise. I confirm, I've had some brakes that really made a racket when you hit them, and these are not them. Then there's a strange thing called modulation. Can you actually control the brakes? I've had a car that had very upgraded brake system, and it was awesome. We had one negative. When you wanted to come to a halt at traffic lights, you couldn't get that fast deceleration and an ease off the pedal, and basically never feel the bite, the dive as the car stops. You back off with the pedal and you're able to come to an absolutely seamless halt. With really upgraded, really powerful brakes, soft compounds, very often it bites, and because it's getting hot, as you back off the pedal, it carries on gripping, and you get that boom. And it's unpleasant on a road car. There's none of that. You can glide to a halt seamlessly. Very, very nice. Brake dust. I am getting some brake dust come off these pads. It's notably less visible than it was on the standard pads. I think that's something to do with what the material is. These are a ceramic based pad rather than the standard mix of fibres and metals that you get from most manufacturers. And so it's a very pale grey dust. And I think it is less than standard. But Redstuff is going to give you some brake dust. So please don't imagine that you're going to get rid of cleaning your wheels by having these. You're not. But I'm content with that. I know if I'd have had the green stuff, which do give better bite from cold, I know I would have been upset, because they do generate a fair amount of debris. Would I have done anything differently if I do this again? No. I chose not to go for a larger disc. I wanted to see how good you can get the brakes with the standard 308s, 305s that I've got, which are the smallest discs, and I'm really happy with that. I don't feel I need anything bigger, and I didn't want to go to Brembo's for cost. I wish I'd bought a rear caliper rebuild kit at the same time as all of the other stuff, which is the only reason that I haven't powder coated the rear calipers. The fronts look amazing. I've jet washed the car several times and they come back to absolutely pristine and shiny every single time. The backs are still silver and tatty, but they were in good condition, and you know, I know a brake rebuild kit even isn't very much money, but I didn't buy one, and so I didn't powder coat the caliper just because I wasn't taking all the rubber parts out. Even though I didn't need to rebuild it, I wish I had, just so I'd have powder coated it, and that's purely a cosmetic thing. I bought a set of new brake shoes for the handbrake. I didn't fit those. As we've discussed, this car had a brand new set of brakes all round 1,000 miles ago, which is why this experiment's kind of unique. You know, we are comparing upgraded to standard, not old to new. And yeah, I didn't know whether the rear brake shoes had been changed as part of that refresh 1,000 miles ago. As it turns out, they had. But again, logic should have told me the handbrakes on these things rarely get used. When they do get used, it's because people leave the handbrake on and forget and start driving the car. So that was a pointless exercise and just a waste of money. So to summarise all of that, my braking power is now epic. I could definitely make it stop quicker by going bigger on diameters, but I really don't need to. If I can't bring this to a halt when I need to now, it's down to an error on my part or somebody pulling out in front of me, neither of which is going to be assisted by having even better brakes. They give me confidence. They feel more in keeping with the high performance luxury car that this is than I felt with the standard ones. I've really enjoyed the build and renovation of the brakes, and I've really enjoyed doing these tests. I'm sure some of you are going to want to do some tests on yours after seeing this, thinking, really? 14 meters? That sounds a bit short. I'm going to go and measure mine. Please, please, please be safe. I live in a very quiet part of the world with some nice big empty roads. Don't go hammering your brakes in public traffic. That's not a good idea. And also, please bear in mind, if you're trying to compare results, you're best just comparing with yourself. You are not on the same road that I'm on. You're not wearing the same tyres that my car is wearing. And the road and the tyre will have more difference than any brake mods, unless your brakes are completely shot. I'm going to put a full set of links below this video, and I'll later put something on the website as well. The links will describe where I got most, if not all, of the parts that I used. They're not sponsored in any way. They are affiliate links. So, you know, it's literally, this is what I bought. I believe them to be good. But a good experience of everything. And please remember that my stuff is for my car, which is a 1996. It's one of the very, very first cars produced. It's got the smallest discs, etc., etc. So please, you know, use as a guide. Don't assume you can order those parts and fit them to your car. But it will give you an indication of what this has cost. Loved making this show. Hope you've enjoyed it. And I really look forward to seeing you again really soon on To The Garage.